Welcome to the Barracks podcast, a podcast about the military brought to you by two grumpy bastards. Here, we're going to discuss all aspects of the military: cultural, political, social, history, and just plain chopping it up about our experience. Tune in and enjoy. Let's move out. All right. Hey, welcome to the Barracks edition of the Two Grumpy Bastards. Pastors? I hope not. Oh, Lord. I'd be struck dead in my chair right now. The Two Grumpy Bastards podcast. This is the Barracks edition where we talk about military stuff mostly, who knows, with Russ and I as the meandering people that we are. And we have a special guest on with us. Honored to have a special guest. Russ, you want to introduce your colleague here?
Sure. For those who don't know, this is Colonel retired Glenn Schmick. We were in ROTC together at the mighty Appalachian State University. He was a year ahead of me. One of my mentors, one of the guys I tried to emulate. Very smart, very driven officer. He went into the military police corps and did some great things there. Deployed several times, as all of us did. Glenn, I want to turn it over to you for a quick intro.
Yeah, great. Thanks. First, Coop, Russ, thanks for having me on. Always great to talk old war stories with old soldiers and kind of hear your stories. And I'm always in awe when I'm around smarter, faster, and cooler people than me. You kind of hit the nail on the head. I'm now Glenn. I retired 2 weeks ago. Kind of cool. In a nutshell, I spent 34 years in uniform, from a National Guard private to active duty. Finished up an amazing career this summer, and now we're staying in Alabama. Had a little bit of a different career than some. Spent a lot of time in the line. Did 3 years as a platoon leader because I probably didn't get it right. Did 7 years as a company commander. Commanded 3 different companies, from an HHD to a line unit to a recruiting company. Then commanded a battalion that was triple-hatted. So I was the police chief of Fort Polk, had a battalion of 1,000 folks, and then a DSERF task force commander. Commanded a tactical MP brigade in Europe at the same time I was the USER provost marshal. So I had about 3,000 folks in 14 installations in 7 countries. So I did everything from, made sure the license plates were made, to ran the DOD prison, to preparing to aggress Mother Russia. In between that, did about 1,000 days in Iraq and Afghanistan, 3 lovely dances there. And then I guess probably the most formative for me, the last assignments, when I came out of War College, I spent a year in the Secretary of the Army's office as a 3-star SES XO. Then did a year in Afghanistan advising the Afghan 4-star. I was his personal advisor, the Deputy Minister for Security, who had the 156,000 police under his command. Then went to Europe, and then got a great offer from the Army that I said no to because I wasn't going to have our son finish high school in DC. And so the Army was nice enough and said, where do you want to go to be irrelevant? And I enjoyed my time down in Alabama. So I spent the last 4 years teaching strategy and strategic leadership to colonels in the Air Force War College. And so that's me.
Well, Glenn, you had a remarkable career. So you've detailed that in a book recently that I read. I got through in 2 days. I could have gotten through it in 1 day, except I had some family stuff I had to go do that night. So, Glenn, why don't you real quick just give us a rundown on your book, what the title and what it's about.
Yeah, I'll tell you. So the book, I've actually got it here, but because I'm trying to pull stuff from it. But it says it's really serving with honor: a soldier's lessons in leadership. And the concept behind it was, first, my son, as we all do, we've got these stories, right? And so I was always, I guess, telling my son a parable about, no shit, there I was. And he's like, Dad, you need to write these down. And I said, no, son, that's not me. I'm not an intellectual guy. I'm not an author. And nobody cares. And so kind of left that. And then his senior year, he said, Dad, you know what I want for my senior gift? I was thinking, beach trip. And he said, I want you to write that book. And I'm like, got me. So I started it, but I failed. Of course, I didn't get it finished until about 4 months ago. It got hard, obviously, but I gave it to him at my retirement ceremony. And kind of the gist of the book is many, many years ago, I think we may have been lieutenants, Russ, about that time. Two books came out, Colin Powell's autobiography and Norman Schwarzkopf.
Yep.
And I read them both within 6 months. And both of them were amazing. But one thing stuck in my mind. Schwarzkopf said the word I about 10 times a page. I. And I got the feeling that he was a genius, at least to himself. And I'm not taking anything away from the man, but that was a turnoff for me. I had trouble getting his points. Whereas Colin Powell, if you remember, because I think I saw you both shaking your head that you had read it, he would normally tell a story, and he was normally the heel or the guy that got it wrong at the young lieutenant or the captain and then he mentioned, hey, but this sergeant or this person did this, and I didn't understand. And then as it plays out as the book goes along, you understand he formulated some of his beliefs that he used later in life based on these events. And I said, that resonated with me. So that's kind of how I wrote the book as I matured through, or hopefully matured through the Army. In each one of these, there was some poignant that when I look back sitting with you guys, 30 years ago, it's still crystal clear that this sergeant did this. And it affected me or stuck with me for 30 years. And I figured if it was important enough that it shaped the way I thought through a couple wars and so many different assignments, maybe there's value in someone else. And what I've found with this book is, boy, I wish more veterans would write books, because everybody's like, yeah, you think that's bad, Glenn? I had this happen. And I'm like, man, that's amazing. So that's kind of how it came about.
Yeah. So like I said, I got through it in 2 days. As I wrote in my text to you after I read it, because I had to write you. There were times when I definitely related from your stories in Ranger School. I mean, I think we all, I don't think there's a single person who made it through Ranger School who didn't quit. By the way, do you still have your? I have never asked you about this, but I'm sure it exists. Do you still have your food list, or has that gone away? Did you write one?
I still have. Not only do I have my food list, but I have my original Ranger handbook still wrapped in 100-mile-an-hour green, 100-mile-an-hour tape. And on the back page, what kept me going is the loss. So at like day one, it's like 310 Rangers, day three, 210 Rangers. And I wrote those, 20 dropped today, 10 dropped today. And then my son the other day, because he just graduated air assault school last week, and they were eating MREs, and I started listing him the magic recipes. He's like, "What are you talking about, Dad? Recipes?" I'm like, "Pumpkin pie. You take the potatoes are rotten, orange beverage base, creamer, mix it up. That's pumpkin pie." And he's like, "Dad, what are you talking about?" I said, "Okay, I guess I'm old."
Yeah. Well, I don't have not run across a single Ranger yet when I asked about the food list who hasn't had one. I still got one thing on my list I never got to, which was the Little Debbie Swiss rolls. For some reason, I had a craving for that one day. You had your stuff written in the back of your Ranger handbook. In my hat, I had written two things. I had the words AS, which was the initials of a guy that was one of my rivals in high school. And I'm like, I'm going to get through Ranger school to show him. And I had the word line, because I don't know if you know this, I got medically recycled in mountains because during the first day of the FTX, going up one of those hills in the TVD, had an ice storm, and about 2/3 of the way to the top, I stepped on something that was frozen, rock, log, no idea, and I with my ruck went all the way to the bottom of that hill and sprained my hip. Didn't even know you could sprain a hip, but
Wow.
so I got medically recycled. But as I'm on recycle status and doing details around Dahlonega, there was the folks who had just finished the phase came in, and they were in line turning in their shit, getting ready to go to Florida. And I remember being so jealous of them for getting through that I wrote that so that every time I was losing motivation, I'd pull out my hat and I'd see line and say, yeah, I want to be in that line, and put my hat back on and keep going. So
Nice. I credit my college sweetheart, Shelly, for getting me through Ranger School, because she left. I thought we were going to get married. I was in OBC, and she said, "I'm a Florida girl. I'm not moving to Fort Polk. It's over." And that was about 2 weeks before I got to Ranger School, and I was like, "I don't care now." I was in Ranger School. I was in first phase when, unfortunately, the Rangers froze to death in Florida phase. So I mean, it was a tough time in Ranger School, but I just I think that's what I needed. I just didn't care. I had nothing else but the Army by then. So,
yeah,
God works in mysterious ways.
I started in the anniversary class of that. And then so when I got recycled, because they treated those guys with a little bit of kid gloves that, at first in the cold. Then when I got recycled to the next class, I got in and they're like, and I mean the RIs said this both in mountains and in Florida. Okay, this anniversary shit's over. Now it's time to get back to Ranger School. And because now the eyes were off of them. So yeah, so I read the book, related through Ranger School. Some of the times just shaking my head saying, what the fuck, Glenn? Like when you got your Humvee stuck on the side of a cliff and you got a bunch of Haitians out there with shovels and stuff to help dig you out. I think we can all relate to something like that. Lord knows I've got tons of times I did that. And when you mentioned Colin Powell's autobiography, he mentioned a couple of times that he had screwed up as a young leader, like when he got drunk, and then they called an alert and he had to get poured into his Jeep seat, or when he lost his platoon's train tickets in Germany. And he said he mentioned that so that no young leaders would understand nobody ever made it without screwing up in some way. And so we all did that. I tried to remember that as I mentored some young officers and NCOs. And it's one of the things that kept me going, is because mistakes happen and they turn into funny stories. As you know, Glenn, I've written 5 books. I haven't written one about the Army. I need to. I've got an idea for a book called "There's Got to Be a Harder Way," about all this stuff, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of that stuff here. So sorry, Coop, this has just been two old comrades kind of reminiscing. Why don't you go ahead and kick us off, and we can get into the meat of what we're talking about.
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Is this thing on?
Yeah.
No, it's all good stuff. It's fun. It's fun listening to you guys talk about a lot of that, because we have a lot of much different backgrounds here. I know you and Glenn have some overlap with some of your career choices and what you guys did. I had a fairly different career plan, so it's just fun to listen to that.
Real quick. Coop is the one who I will never forget diagnosed me once. Coop is a medical service corps officer,
Okay.
and so or was a medical service corps officer, and it used to be we knew each other when we taught ROTC out in UC Davis and Sacramento State out in California. And so it used to be the second day of every training exercise, I would get really bad headaches and I didn't know why. And Coop and I are standing on a hilltop the second day of this exercise. I got a massive headache. I'm like, man, I've always had these headaches, second day of training exercise. And Coop looks at me and says, hey, you drink a lot of soda? I was like, 1 or 2 Mountain Dews a day. And I'll never forget, I think I'm quoting here. He said, yeah, it's caffeine withdrawal, dumbass. Stop doing that. And so that was how our relationship kind of blossomed from there, because that was the first FTX that Coop went on with the ROTC unit. So anyway, Coop, I had to share that story about how wonderfully you treated me during my misunderstanding about the way the body works.
The
I
caring
really
compassion of doctors. Love it.
just for the record, I'm a 70 hotel, so field medevac.
Ah,
So I'm not a I was a medical platoon leader in an infantry battalion. I did all the ground stuff and all the air medevac stuff. So that was my role. So I'm not a physician. Just to make sure nobody can. I did go to medical school for 2 years at the University of Washington, and I dropped out because I hated it. And the Army finally found me 2 years later and goes, "Remember that scholarship we gave you, fucko? You're going to officers basic course next month." And while there I went through a board. I was an Army reservist, and while there I went through a board, and like 300-400 people competed for an active duty assignment. This is kind of funny. We're going to roll into assignments here. And this is how the Army views this stuff. So I went through this board, and it was these. I mean, these were top people, you know. So got to the very end. There was about 300 people that started out with a written test, and then you did all, you know, the murder board and all that, you know, standing up in front of the general's board. Um, and it was between me and this other dude, and he was a good dude. I mean, he every bit as good of an officer to be as I was in a lot of ways. I was in my prime, you know, 350 PT tests, the whole 9 yards. So I had that down. Smart guy. So I had all that stuff down. So the generals, they or the general is a 2-star general, who was I can't remember who he was, but he was the president of the board. He said, "All right, gentlemen, can you take your dog tags out and show me?" And we're wearing Class A's, you know, the old green style 1970s Class A's. And I took my dog tags out. I had my dog tags on, and he did not. And that's how I won that board. I mean, small details, right? And the funny thing about that, though, supposedly the board was going to be, if you're the winner of this board, you get a 3-year active duty assignment to any duty station you want to go, any duty station you want to go. And I'm like, holy shit! My mother grew up in Germany. I've always wanted to go to Germany. You know, Vincenza, Italy. You know, I'm thinking all these cool places I can go. Find something remote in New Zealand, maybe. I don't know. You know, so I'm scouring. I'm going through. This is pre-internet. So I'm scouting. I'm in the library looking for all the different duty assignments. So I go down to the personnel officer. This guy, still remember the guy. I would lay him out right now. I don't care. He's probably 65 years old. I'd pull him off his wheelchair and beat him. Bob Sipe is his name. If you ever came across him, and he was a captain. I was a second lieutenant. And I said, "Hey, sir, I'm down here to put in my preference list for my duty assignments from the board." And he goes, "What are you talking about? You got orders. You're going to Fort Hood in 28 days. You're going to first cav, 27 cav." Yeah. So that was I won the board, and and I had absolutely nothing to say. It ended up being awesome. I ended up loving that assignment. I mean, I was in the great Gary Owen, you know, a lot of history, of course, in the 7th cav, around some of my favorite people still to this very day. Russ knows one of my company commanders when I was a platoon leader, was one of your instructors. Fucking awesome guy. Dan Goldthorpe. But yeah, that was my introduction to the Army. They say something to you, and I'm like, why am I going to first cav? You're like number 2 in this class. You won this board, and there's a shortage in their DRF. They need lieutenants. So have a nice day. But shut up, Lieutenant. Here's your orders. You have fun. That was my introduction to the assignment process. It got better as I got older. Of course, as you start being competent and leaders have an eye on you and pick you for jobs, it gets a lot better, of course. And it sounds like you experienced a lot of that, Glenn, and I know Russ did too. But yeah, that's my anecdote about my introduction to how the Army assigns you.
So two quick anecdotes about Coop. One, the guy Goldthorpe he was talking about was an instructor at the career course when I went. I love Coop talk about the story when soldiers would come in, and if they had like a real sob story, he would take his hat off and grab a chaplain's hat and put on and just start nodding at him. And Coop has a fairly, I don't know if you remember telling me this, Coop, but you have a fairly famous OBC classmate, who was in film and entertainment.
Not a classmate. She was my team leader.
Okay.
She was cadre. She was a captain when I was there.
Glenn, if you ever get the chance one day, find a computer that you're never going to touch again and look up the name Johnny Black. She starred in some films of a biological nature, and apparently, so those are all the we all have stories something like that. But anyway, you were talking about your assignment, Glenn. I don't know if you know when I found out my first assignment. This was at Appalachian State. The day previous, my college girlfriend had broken up with me.
Must be an app thing.
I can relate. She would. By the way, my relationship with her and one other of my classmates' relationship with several others had them implement a rule. I don't know if it's still in effect, but they outlawed. They made a rule that MS4s could no longer date MS1s the following year. So she was an MS1. But she had broken up with me. My best friend came over that night, and it was the first time and one of only 3 times in my life where I got drunk enough. I do not remember the most of the evening. So I showed up to we had a award ceremony the next day, just in the classroom, and uh, I'm still reeking of booze, and our PMS pulls me aside and said, "Hey, I told everybody else at PT, but you weren't there. Yeah, you're going to Fort Irwin." So I got notified I was going to the desert and the National Training Center while still inebriated the day after breaking up with my girlfriend. There aren't a lot of women at Fort Irwin, so I was anticipating spending the next few years kind of alone on that front. So that was my first assignment. And then I get to the career course, meet with the infantry branch dudes there, and they said, "Hey, thanks for going to Fort Irwin for 3 years. Now we're going to send you to Korea for a year."
Wow.
Yeah, everybody else is getting, Hawaii and, Fort Bragg. And they said, "Yeah, so we're going to send you to Korea for a year," where I had one of my 2 worst assignments in the Army. I spent the first 6 months there as the 2ID Division Protocol Officer.
Sorry.
Well, first of all, you know my personality. That fit me like a glove.
I can't
Yeah,
even picture that.
perfect match.
I can't even picture that. I
Oh,
can't
yeah.
even,
It
I
was
It's
can't
only
very,
even
because I
imagine
don't
near
think
that.
anybody's going to 2ID.
yeah. So Division Protocol Officer for 6 months, and then I got a bit of a break. They sent me down to one of the brigades, and because they had an open slot, I got to be the Brigade S1 for 6 months. So that was a whole lot of fun. After that assignment, though, was back in the old days when you got to Korea, you got first choice coming back. I was able to grab hold of my career and I got to Fort Campbell and so on and so forth. But yeah, Army assignments. I was back when we were in ROTC. I was trying to be of the mindset of, hey, the Army will take care of you. Let them direct you where they need you most. And I quickly learned that that's not always the way it works. You have to have some influence over your career. Let people know where you want to go and what you want to do, not just kind of rely on the randomness of things. So that's how I got a buddy of mine who unfortunately is no longer with us. Coop, you remember Brian Anderson?
Yeah, I sure do.
He reached out and said, "Hey, we've got an open MS3 instructor slot," and so they worked some magic there. I got notified while I was in Iraq that I got that slot. This was before stop loss, stop move. I had 25 months in command, and so they pulled me out of Iraq to go to be in an ROTC instructor. One of the best assignments I ever had. Your son Glenn is in ROTC at Auburn, isn't he?
Correct.
What year is he going into?
Junior.
He's going to be in MS3. Awesome.
Yep. He loves it. He's hooked.
Oh,
I told him, I told him, as you don't have to serve. I mean, you'd be the 7th generation, but you can choose not to. And he said, "Yeah, Dad, I don't think Thanksgiving would have much to talk about." So, but he's actually turning into. It's in his blood. You can see that he gets excited when he's tested. And I said, "You'll do just fine."
well, first of all, congratulations on him getting through air assault school. Because I'll say, Ranger School was the toughest school because of how long it was, but over such a short period of time, air assault was the toughest in terms of both physical and mental, with the tests, with the Swiss seat test and the aircraft test and the all that kind of shit. That was a challenging school.
It's so funny. I'll try not to brag like a doting dad, but
Please do.
Hunter's just built like a machine. He benches 320. He's my size, which I'm not very big, 5'7". He's maybe 5'8". He benches 325, runs. He can run 5 miles in 7:15. Has done 2 Norwegian ruck marches, the 19 miles, running them. And he said, "Dad, I'm going to try to win the ruck, at air assault. Air assault school doesn't sound that hard." Day 3, he calls me. He's like, "Dad, I don't care what anybody says. Air assault school is hard." He goes, "I did the first ruck march when I was in the middle of the pack." I said, "What's up?" He goes, "Dad, we're barely eating. We get no sleep. The air conditioner breaks. I said, son, you've now discovered the difference between looking good in the gym in college with taking protein and creatine and being Army hard, which is functioning with caffeine, nicotine, and hate in your heart. And so it was great for him to experience. It's a little bit different. As we like to say, everybody wants to be gangster until it's time to do gangster shit.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Air assault was I was glad that I went through before I was married, so I didn't have to worry about, family time during that time. Um, you know, the
I
rec
went
march
through
and
as a
everything was,
cadet. It was at Christmas. That was fun.
oh, yeah, no, I don't think so.
In Oklahoma, 20
Ah,
degrees repelling was not my idea of fun.
no, I was at Fort Campbell. It was February, but Fort Campbell was modestly warm by then.
Yeah. You
Um,
know, I don't know if you gentlemen have kept up or the change in the Army assignments. The new marketplace. Did that exist before you got out?
it was about to begin, but it wasn't quite there yet, and I was already at my final assignment when that happened. My final assignment, uh, I was coming out of Hawaii, where I spent 7.5 years. Um, Mostly because I did that because my daughter was in EFMP.
Mm-hmm.
The listeners know this. I don't know if you do. My daughter has cystic fibrosis,
Okay.
which is a lung thing. She's doing great with it, but um, I wanted to keep her in the same medical system so that she could be seen by the same doctors and she could develop, while she was young, develop good, healthy lungs. Well, the Army tried to move me a few times during that time frame. I was in Iraq when they were telling me they were going to move me to some joint interagency job in Dallas. And I will never forget that I was told by a friend of mine, and I wanted to reach through I was on Skype, I think. I wanted to reach through the headphones and strangle him when he said this, because I was like, because I had an approved IPCOT to stay there, and
Mm-hmm.
because of my daughter, and he's like, yeah, we're not going to honor that. I said, dude, I'm staying here for my daughter, and he said, and I believe I'm just about quoting here. Well, your daughter didn't join the Army, you did, and this is where the Army's going to send you. And it took the intervention of more than one general officer to get that changed. So when my time in Hawaii was coming to an end, I'm pretty sure I had a post-it note or something in my file about this guy's a pain in the ass. Let's find something for him. So in anticipating that, I volunteered for a year in Saudi Arabia so that I could control the back end, getting to Fort Leavenworth. And then even then, I had did you ever know General Brown, Lieutenant General Brown? All right, big,
No.
tall dude. He actually played basketball for Army under Coach Krzyzewski. So, really, really good dude. He was I got to know him real well in the 25th. He was the deputy commanding general for support. And uh, I ran into him at a conference when I was escorting a group of Saudi generals around to some various functions. And I was like, "Hey, General Brown, how you doing?" He's like, "Hey, Russ, what's going on?" I was like, "What are you doing now?" So he's like, "Oh, I'm the commanding general of Fort Leavenworth." I was like, "Oh, really? Well, I'm heading there, when I'm done with Saudi." Like, really, what do you want to do? I want to teach at CGSC. That's kind of my passion is teaching. He said, "Well, when you get back, send me an email. We'll take care of it." So I did that. And then a few months later, they they sent me a new email, said, "Well, you're going to go somewhere else now." And I'm like, what? So I had to write General Brown back for him to rejigger the assignment. I learned a lot about the assignments process, one of which is branch can tell you that we have X job at a post, but it's really up to the G1 of that post to determine where you go. And what branch has is slots to posts that then, it's coded against, whatever the job is, but that's kind of irrelevant to the G1 whenever you arrive. Because the G1's like,
It's
all right, now we've got somebody.
it's changed now dramatically. I'm
Okay.
a huge fan of how it's changed.
I'm not
But
familiar with the new
yeah,
process and the new thing.
so if you're interested, I'll kind of share with you because
Yeah.
I have some of the horror stories. And in fact, it's still that way. Colonels, there's a my colonel's branch guy when I was coming out of brigade. If I ever see him and I'll have kind of the similar discussion, because he told me, he was going to, since I didn't want to go to DC, he was going to assign me to another deployment, my fourth. And then when I refused, he was going to put me out of the Army in 90 days. And by then, I'm not a rookie. I'm like, yeah, colonels don't decide colonels' fate. Good luck with that. And obviously, it worked out fine. But so I think there are a few things that I really got excited about how the Army did. Really, three in my last 4 or 5 years that I said, "Good job, Army." And one of them was the marketplace. That's what they call now this jobs. And so I got to do the first iteration as a receiver, as a brigade commander. I got to advertise jobs, and then I got to select those that come in, and then I got to mentor folks that were then going to go into the market. And so the way it works, without geeking out, is a unit will list their requirements almost 12 to 18 months out. They will look and project who they're losing. And then the HR folks will validate. You can't say, "Hey, I need 50 lieutenant colonels for my company." No, there is. You still have an accounts manager for that unit that works with the G1 at a post and says, "Yep, Russ's battalion is going to lose 9 captains next year. He needs it." So once you do that, your jobs enter a spreadsheet that every captain who's qualified in the Army can see, down to the unit assignment. And you, as the commander or your staff, you write the job description. Platoon leader in Italy, leading 60, dudes, or staff weenie, spending miserable nights grinding out slides, whatever you want to put. And then those officers can go in there and they can see what's available around the world, and they can rack and stack, interested, not interested. And then your unit, if you're a unit, as the system goes on, you'll say, "Hey, we now have 40 officers who are interested in coming here. Let me see their ORBs. Hey, I want to talk to these." Or, "Hey, this is the number 1 or 2. And so now it's no longer the G1. So now there's a direct relationship, and now there's no hidden, back when we were growing up, the branch manager took care of the guy that he liked with the brag job. And the RDF job that popped up in some miserable place, it was the next dude, because the branch manager got his report card written on how well he put pegs in holes.
Yeah.
And so he had no interest in you. It was pegs and holes. Well, now it's a relationship and a deal. So what I found interesting, if you're running a bad organization, if you're not a brigade where people want to go, word gets out. Now, granted, there's some geography, right? I probably wasn't the greatest brigade commander, but I was in Germany. Coop would have been dying to come hang out in the 18th MP Brigade. No matter what job, he said, "Oh, I get to go to Germany." And some places like 2ID, a little bit harder, no matter how well you got to, climb it. But what it does is it opens up transparency. And in the marketplace, you can see the POC in the units. You can reach out to the unit. And so as a brigade commander, the way I did it, and I'm sure brigade commanders do it much different, but I didn't care about lieutenants. A lieutenant's a lieutenant, a lieutenant. A non-branch qualified captain didn't care as a brigade commander. I powered that down because I had an engineer battalion, I had an MP battalion, I had a prison. I powered those decisions down to the battalion commanders. But when I needed a senior medical service officer, the first person who got the cut was my senior medical service officer. The intel folks, my intel guy. So they went through all that stuff and they got to rack and stack who they thought was a good fit. And then the second vote, was the XO, the DCO, the sergeant major, and then they came to me. So by the time it came to the brigade commander, there was very few that I was deep diving. It was really major and sergeant major and lieutenant colonels that I, deep dived and interviewed myself. But the beautiful part about that system, number one, you could see everything 18 months out. Number two, if you selected that unit as your first choice and the unit selected you as their first choice, branch can't do anything about it. But it's either a 3 or a 4-star to override it. And it's so powerful. In my last job, I was the Army senior advisor. So I was the senior of 13 lieutenant colonels and colonels. And I took 3 brigade commanders who were coming out of brigade command, who their branch, their BOD, the board of directors, general officers that really make the decisions, they had destined them to go to kingmaker jobs or to do chief of staff grinder jobs. I called them and I said, man, how would you like to come instruct? It's a great place to retire, hang out with a bunch of other grumpy old men and women. And they're like, love it. I put them number one. They put me number one. Their 1, 2, and 3 stars can be mad, but it's unless they were willing to go to the vice chief of staff and argue that this officer was so critical, they would not override what's called a 1-to-1 match. That's powerful.
Well, let me ask this, because it makes me curious about some assignment considerations that were big deals when I was in. The 2 of which you should obviously be familiar with. The third was fairly unique. Well, I don't know about unique, but was pegged to the infantry. The first one, and the one that applied to me and got me to Hawaii, was how does this factor in with the exception? I'm sorry, with the EFMP? How does it factor in with the Married Army Couple program? And then in the infantry, there's the heavy light imperative. So I don't know how those factors play in under the new system.
So a lot of that stuff is done. So I'll talk EFMP and married couples. A lot of that is manipulated through who the gaining unit picks. And that comes through your 1 channels. So let's say I've racked and stacked, or my brigade is racked and stacked. And it may have changed some now, but I've been out, so I'm now irrelevant to the current. But the way it would do is I'd say, okay, these are my top 5 choices. We're going to 1-to-1 match them. And my S1 would come in and say, hey, sir, branch is asking us to put this one in there. I don't care what branch wants. Well, it's a married couples, and the spouse is going into a KD position in the sister brigade in Grafenwehr, and they're trying to get a position for the spouse. And I'd be like, okay, done. Because, it's, if you're picking people and they've got a good match, you still allow leaders to do, okay, I'm not going to mess with married couples or EFMP, because to be honest, at least the brigade commanders, and this is going to sound very uppity, and I don't want it to sound that way, but
Please
for
do.
me, the epiphany commander, I wanted to have the best battalion. And at some point in time, I think it was probably then I realized sometimes I've got to make my battalion worse for the benefit of the enterprise. And so it's very easy as brigade commander to say, no, that guy's a rock star, but it's a no-brainer. To keep that family together, I'm not taking it. Or I need this, you've got an exceptional family member, by all means. I can imagine the stress of having that family. So anything I can do to support, an assistant S4 is an assistant S4, a major is KD captain, so let's give them a run type stuff. So that still happens. And then you hear people say, well, isn't that the good old boy system? If Johnny wants to go to a unit and he calls a buddy in that unit and says, hey, can you put in a good word for me? Because I got that question from young majors, because I would give this LPD the last 4 years at the Air Force's majors school, ILE, we had about 40 to 50 Army would go every year. So I would tell them how that system worked. And I said, you can, if you're calling it the good old girl or the good old boy system, you're looking at it wrong. Given the choice, wouldn't you want to work with people that you trust say are good people? I mean, are you going to select people that people don't want to work with? So my point to the captains and the majors was, under this new system, your reputation matters lower than it ever did before. In our day, if you were an asshole as a lieutenant or captain, it generally didn't follow you because nobody knew where you were going to tell somebody, hey, don't take Glenn. He doesn't play well with other people. Until you showed up and everybody went, crap. But under the new system, since everybody in your unit, the seniors can see who's trying to come there, and if they're part of the voting block, the seniors, they can say, oh, I've got 16 people asking to come here as an intel officer. S2, look at these. Tell me if you know any of them and any of them good. And it's real easy for them to go, nice guy, nice guy, nice guy, can't stand him. Well, then you as a commander, you're evaluating your two. If you trust your two and he's got good judgment, you're like, shh. If you don't particularly care much for your two, then you're like, okay, noted. But this system, I think, has done a couple things. It forces everybody to show what's available. So those golden jobs that you, me, and Coop never saw now have to be entered in the system. Even black book assignments, to an extent, nominative joint jobs, they're in there. You're just not going to have the unit show interest. So as an example, I had to show my colonel slots. And every year I would get 50 lieutenant colonels who are graduating War College wanting to be an instructor at War College. They're like, hey, I'm in the colonel bracket. I didn't even entertain them. Not because they weren't great people, but I was looking for three things perfectly, 2 out of 3 minimum. War College graduate, joint qualified, and former brigade commander. And I said, it's different having been colonel than having been a colonel. And so those joint jobs are a lot the same. Like you were talking about the black book, it may say this, but the people who are selecting on the other side know that it's an infantry position.
Yeah.
And so if you apply for it as an MP, they're not going to click any interest in me applying for it.
Yeah.
And so it's a much better system. Is it perfect? No, but it is so much better than the old days of trying to bribe your branch manager, or like you and I was raised, probably APT taught us this, go where the Army sends you.
Yeah. Trust the Army. Yep.
Trust the Army, do good wherever you go, and they'll take care of you. And that's how I ended up, in 7 years of company command. And the people left and right of me that were below zone had 1 year of company command in a TDA unit. And I'm like, what the hell?
Well, and you also, now 3 commands is something I haven't really heard of very much. One of the reasons I had 2 commands, I had an HHC, then I had a rifle company, and I was grateful to have 2 commands because it meant that infantry branch could not send me to a recruiting assignment. And that is one of the assignments I wanted to avoid like the plague. It was fun at UC Davis and Sacramento State trying to get some kids into the program. I never heard a recruiting company commander have fun at the recruiting stations. Sounded like a shit job. So yeah, that's the recruiting companies. Coop, you never did recruiting, did you? And now I can't hear you now.
Oh, I turned my mic off in case I made any embarrassing noises while you guys were having your catch up, your chummy catch up. I'm kidding. It's all good. No, I thank God I avoided recruiting almost entirely, except for at the ROTC level, which everybody was a recruiter at an ROTC.
Yeah. One of my buddies, he went recruiting. He told me about a time that he got home at like 8 o'clock at night, and he got home at like 7 o'clock at night once, and his wife wanted to know why he was home so early.
I had a rural company. So I had gosh, let me see. I blacked most of this out. 5 stations, 14,000 square miles. And one of the random USAREC regulations is that a commander or first sergeant must inspect every station every week. So I was TDY 40 weeks out of the year for 3 years. And so it was, not counting the first trip to Iraq, it was the most stressful job I've ever been in. I didn't put this in the book, but because I don't know if the statute of limitations run out, but I can literally remember, if somebody smoked dope or whatever, they had to be interviewed, and the company commander had to do a waiver. I can remember driving from Natchez, Mississippi to Alexandria, Louisiana on the back roads, interviewing a kid with a speaker in, laptop on the passenger seat, driving about 65 miles an hour in a hurricane, a real hurricane, trying to type a waiver, drive, not crash, and get to the recruiting station in time to fax the waiver to the battalion commander who was waiting to then interview the kid. This was the ludicrousy. Back then, last other story, and then I'm sure we've got important stuff to cover. The system was so stressful, and that's kind of what I wrote about in the book. And I've got my brigade XO that I wrote about in the book, Ray Sanchez. Today, she's a recruiting battalion commander in Houston, doing great. But I talk to her about once a month as we relive pain. We would have people that would go up to join, and they would test hot for marijuana. So the Army wanted us to have them do a piss stick before, but we didn't trust a sergeant or the station commander of the sergeant. So every time a young kid urinated on a stick before they went up to recruiting to the MEP station, they would have to put the piss stick on a flatbed scanner, scan it. This is before smartphones, and send me the picture of a piss stick. So I would be pulling in a hotel at 8 o'clock at night, and then trying to do dial-up internet, because this is before, and spend 3 hours waiting for at 56,000 kilobytes or whatever, 56K download to look at a stick and to determine whether the kid was hot or not. And if he was hot and we didn't submit the stick, then that sergeant could face or did face a battalion Article 15.
Oh, geez.
So that was that was the level of things that I'm glad have gone by. And so I would say the new or the assignments process, I'm very happy about. The commander assessment program, I think, is absolutely awesome. And then the fact that we're starting to get back to allowing first line leaders to discipline soldiers, I think, are three of the big things that I was most happy to see come back before I hung up the boots.
Yeah, Coop will remember this. We had information that one of our cadets was smoking dope. And so we actually did urinalysis in ROTC. This kid was smart enough to know how to lay off, and he did not come up hot. However, two others did come up hot. The one that, it's funny, we actually talked about this, I think, last week, Coop. One of the cadets who was an MS3, she immediately afterwards, she came up to me and said, "Hey, Major Meyer, just to let you know, my roommate smokes a lot of dope. And so that I'm probably going to come up." And I said, "Hey, that's not the way these tests work. You have to be at a phone booth, like smoking 5 joints back to back. So if you come up hot, it's because of you. They know what the nanogram level is." And so she went away the following week. And then one of the kids at Sacramento State, I just taught class. I was like, hey, I don't even remember his name anymore. So and so, you need to stick behind. And maybe I could have been more empathetic. I'm not really known for that sometimes. And he sat down and said, hey, I'm here to talk to you about it. I said, bad news. I said, yep. You pissed hot, and we're gonna nullify your contract because we can't have that. And he started crying and stuff, and I kind of felt bad, but yeah. So the drug thing was a big one.
If they just would have,
90.
I had the biology and some of the medical background, and nobody ever listened to me. I tell these cadets, fucking dope stays in your system for at least 30 days, could be months depending on your body fat. So do coke. It's out in 36 hours, you dumb fucks.
you know, it's we would in Louisiana, 70+% of the people that we talked to about the Army tested positive. 75%.
Jeez.
Wow.
And there was, in legend, there was some green monster mix on the third shelf of Rite Aid that you could mix with such and such, and you would test clean. But it was amazing how we would keep these kids on, or they'd want to join, and we would have to, have them do, basically like parole officers. Come
Detox.
by every month for like 2 months clean, and we'll put you in. And yeah, I was such an idiot. I was so naive to realize how prevalent drugs were
Well,
commonplace.
you remember when we were back when you and I were in high school, somebody getting caught smoking marijuana was a big deal.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, remember back we were back when Crips and Bloods were king, and 3 strikes and you were a lifer for drugs.
Yeah.
The guys that
Now,
go ahead, Glenn. I'm sorry.
no, I was just, you're absolutely right. Now, I'm vaping while I'm talking to a cop, and then I'm mad why he's hassling me. It's just a joint. It's a different world.
I always tell people this, and for my depression and PTSD, I have used CBD. I've used some alternative methods, which I have found helpful in the past. I don't anymore. I don't have anything in my system at all, but um um so I can get the medicinal qualities of it. But thinking when I was in high school, in the junior high and high school in the 70s and 80s, if you smoked pot, you were what we called a stoner. You probably drove a Chevelle with 4 different colors fenders and a lot of Bondo on it that rattled.
Yep.
And you wore really shitty leather jackets and had long hair and acne. And you got probably hung by your jockstrap by guys that looked like me a little bit in during PE. I mean, they were stoners, man. You're fucking loser, fucking stoner. Because I was a jock and I was a good student, and so I was one of those guys. I wasn't a bully, but I was one of those guys. I was clean. I did drink in high school. I partied, but that was Schmick beer up in an old logging landing up in the middle of the woods, burning big logging tires and stuff until 3 or 4 in the morning, listening to Led Zeppelin. That's about as rowdy as we got. But it is, the culture has shifted so much in this regard that even old assholes like me that I'd been out for several years, and it's like, hey, give CBDs a try, and I found it kind of helpful. And I, in a million years, never thought I would use any type of product like that because I haven't done any hard drugs in my life. I'm an old-fashioned drunk. Never done any hard drugs at all. And for me to take that leap, it was like I felt like a loser going into a store for the first time and buying something like all these. And the people were very nice and very professional, very clean store here in Washington State. It's perfectly legal. But it's like, I'm like looking around, hoping hope none of my jock friends from high school drive by 40 years later and see me in this store. That is just extraordinary to me, that number you threw out. I had no idea it would be that high. It's extraordinary.
So in recruiting, in typical Army fashion, and I'm told it still exists, we tried to do an equation. It was actually called a map. And every recruiter had a map. And what it was is they would take historical data, and recruiters were supposed to make appointments, then you conduct appointments, then you test them to see if they pass, then you send them to MEPS, and then they join. Well, we would do these, every recruiter had a map that they had to show you almost like their ID card. And it was their percentages. So I could pick a recruiter and I knew that he needed to make 60 appointments to actually get to conduct 30. And if he conducted 30, he would get 5 to test. And if he got 5 to test, he would get 2 to go to MEPS, and he would get 1 contract. So every recruiter had this math. And why that mattered is because that controlled how many appointments he had to make in a week. If he needed a contract, if he needed 2 contracts this month and it took him 60 appointments to make a contract, then we were expecting him to make 120 appointments in a month. And so you learned a lot when you're looking at these maps in Louisiana, and you had all these appointments and all these conducts, and then the test goes down to like nothing. Well, you don't have to be a business major to look for the choke point. And okay, why are you not converting these, appointments conducted to test? Well, it's because the appointment conducted is when you talk to them about drugs and pissing. And so that's when you discover you're like, you're kidding me. The other thing that these recruiters face even today in Louisiana, it's Napoleonic law. So DAs have something called nolo pros, which means they're just not choosing to prosecute. I mean, they're just like, yep, he got caught with 5 pounds of marijuana and a 44 Magnum, but we're not going to do anything about it. Well, the problem is under federal and under recruiting, that's an open charge. So he can't join. Even unless the DA, the DA has to write a letter so that they choose to never do it. Anyway, we've made it complicated. Making weight. I think recruiting these 2 pilot programs we did, I was first against, the one where you will join the Army and then we'll make you thin. And I was like, first the grumpy old man in me is like, that's crap. But then if you look at society as a whole and the bad, we can't expect our generation, my mom said, go outside and don't come back till dark. And you drank from a hose. And okay, great. This generation now can have Grubhub at 12, drink 20 different flavors of Monster, that are giving cash. And so they're a wreck and their parents aren't teaching them. So I'm looking at the success or the initial stats I saw on that was pretty impressive because it wasn't really about weight loss. It was about providing these young structure that they didn't have from their family life. And it was an extension.
Yeah.
We got it through basic training, yelling, but what we had already figured out is, or we didn't have to be told you're fat. I mean, I was still a fat little kid and lazy, but I wasn't, I at least made the standards. So when you look at, 20, what is it? I'm a little rusty on my stats, but I want to say it's only less than 27% of 18 to 27-year-olds in the US can actually qualify to join.
Yeah, something like that.
And then when you take it's only 12% that have a propensity to join, and you overlay that onto the college population, you're down to single-digit percentages. And in fact, we're actually, most of what we're getting now are people who want to go to college but want to stop by the Army. We're not getting those that don't have much other options anymore because they're falling away because of drugs. I'm both doctor-given ADHD type drugs and other drugs. They're screened out. So the Army had to do something to evolve or lower the standards on things that we all cringe about, felonies and mental capability. What do you think, dude? Do you lower the standards for medical?
No, you don't. That's I think you're playing with fire with that one. That's the one that I don't. I have thought in the past that some of the medical requirements, which, having served most of my career at least being peripheral to this. And at one point, I had you know how you get those, we could talk ad nauseum, but you get those extra duties that become full-time jobs when you're an officer. So this is my full-time job and this is my full-time job, but they just made me, no shit. I had to, the hell you even call them anymore? It was all of the, not report a survey. It was all the medical,
Flipple.
line of
Oh,
duty. No,
line of
Line
duty.
of duty
Okay.
investigations.
yeah,
okay.
line of duty investigations. So I was the guy that, because for some reason people thought, well, he's a medevac guy, so he must know a lot about, you know, medical stuff. And it's like, you know, I know some, I'm peripheral to it, smarter than most people, but I became the line of duty investigation officer, even though I was a G3 and G5 for an entire division, by the way, both at the same time. But they gave me that because they had nobody else to fill it. Fortunately, I had a civilian and NCO that were really good at their job. So they basically would say, just review what we wrote, sir, and just give us your, you know. But lines of duty, I would see, you know, I saw a lot of that. And I thought at some point that some of the medical stuff was a little harsh to me, but I understood it. I actually kind of understood it. It's a really dangerous thing you're doing when you put somebody that's not completely medically qualified in harm's way, and it's really, really scary to do it. It's like, oh, big deal, you got asthma. Well, you got these, you know, you got these medications. No, fuck no. I have what's I have in shoot. They call it exercise induced asthma, but it's basically from being exposed to some stuff in the army. So I get asthma attacks now. I can tell you that when I get my asthma attacks, I am completely incapable of doing anything. I'm completely down for the count, and sometimes it's for hours. So yeah, I have a lung issue now because of some of that. Part of my 100% disability in the VA. So I don't know. I don't think you fuck around with the medical stuff. I just don't. I think that there's a lot of things that, you know, we can sit here all day, and I really appreciate your point of view, Glenn, because I like that you're not sitting here just banging on the army and saying, oh, you know, it was a piece of shit and everything was wrong and all that kind of stuff. I love that you're kind of telling us what right looks like to you, to a certain degree, and what's changed. Because I want to transition to that a little bit here, before we end on some fun notes. But the Army gets a lot right, and has since the United States Army was born, and they get a lot right. And when you take a step back and you look at some of these, I was very famous. Russ can tell you. I had an NCO, Keith Schmick, had said, if Major Koopman doesn't break 8 regulations by 9 o'clock, he's fucking having a bad day. I'm that guy. Never had a reputation for a rule follower. I was always a maverick. Always got the good assignments, and my bosses were real happy. You know, I never got more than, and not throwing this out here to measure dicks, but I never got anything other than above center mass. Never got anything other than that in my entire career. Not one single OER. And so I can look back on that and go, well, I must have been a pretty good job, because I know a lot of my bosses, like Mark Conley, had to convince his boss that, yeah, maybe Major Koopman's a little bit of an asshole and he's a little rough around the edges, but this is what he's done for us. So give him a above center mass. You know, when your bosses fight for you, that means you're doing a great job. But the whole issue that I see with some of this stuff is that, I kind of lost my train of thought there, because I had a memory in my head that you would laugh at, Russ, but I won't share it right now. But
Might as well.
no, I really do think, I mean, I've been a lot of a maverick, but I also knew that my oath of office was, and it still is, incredibly important to me. I'm still very loyal to the United States Army, whatever it's evolved into or whatever it was or will become. And the Army gets a lot right. And one of the things it does really well, having seen it from, you know, the administrative side, and I was never a hospital no, I was a field guy, but and then I spent most of the last part of my career out of medevac and just doing, like, I was an operations guy, G3, G5, yeah, command, that kind of thing, outside my branch completely. But the Army gets the medical thing down pretty good. I mean, one of the things I was most proud of being a medical service corps officer, being a medevac guy, is that how the high percentage of soldiers that survive, you know, battle wounds, how you know, it's way above what civilian EMTs achieve, way above. You know, the system, the medical system, the triage system in the Army, all the way through judging what a soldier's supposed to look like and what may get a soldier in trouble medically, I think the Army does really well. I'll be honest with you, Glenn. That's one area that I would go, yeah, I don't like medical waivers. I really don't. Um, that's not to say soldiers haven't been cheated out of, okay, they got a knee injury and they had it rebuilt and they got, I know a lot of guys through the VA system. I do a lot of vets groups and stuff like that. I know a lot of guys, it's like, really? They put you out for that? Whether they're telling me the whole truth or not, you don't always know. You don't know what's necessarily in their medical file, but I think they get a lot right. I just, that's my opinion, gentlemen.
I have a huge belief. So, so here's something that I used to tell the baby colonels. I don't mean that, but I got to be a very old colonel, like 9 years. So I would call it.
We
I'd
always
say,
do that. We
look,
always do that with junior officers after we've gotten past a certain point.
yeah. And I said, look, if anybody comes to you and starts a sentence with, it's simple. All you need to do is whatever it is they say after, don't pay any attention to.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing simple at the strategic level. Everything has a cost, and people tend to, especially what I call, the vet bros, or the Facebook warriors, they tend to look at it only from the angle in which they're looking at. Well, we shouldn't take, everybody should have to do this, to be in the Army. And you're like, yes, in a perfect world, if I had an endless amount of pool of people, we could do that. But when you walk in with that stance, then you realize, okay, if we do that, we're going to lose the volunteer force. And then we go to a draftee force. You quickly realize that, yep, that's a pipe dream. And so the other thing I used to always remind myself as I got older, I didn't when I was younger in the Army. I remind myself that the guys who sat in the chair above me and the one that I'm in weren't dumb. And so if something is done this way in the Army, I'm not just this super smart guy that's like, oh, it's easy, you should just do this. There's a reason. And I used to use the example to soldiers when they said, sir, it's simple, we just need to shoot more. And I'm like, okay, that's great. Can you wait 4 years? Because that's how far the palm cycle projected out that ammo. And then, oh, by the way, to fund that ammo, we're going to take away your barracks air conditioner. I mean, you tell me what you want to give up. You want to give up your GI Bill?
Yep.
And then they're like,
Right.
no, I want it
On
both.
it
And I'm
all.
like, you're no longer dealing at the senior level. But back to your point, Coop, one of the things I said that the Army has gotten 4,000% better is a medical. And a week before I went to Ranger School, I blew out 2 discs. I ruptured them. I went through Ranger School with 2 ruptured discs. Deployed my first time to Haiti for 6 months, and they didn't discover my ruptured disc for 7 years. And then the Army put me on Motrin, which I now know is bad. Motrin every day for 10 years as a prescription.
That's another
Um,
thing.
oh yeah, horrible. And the level of care I got when I was young, both the stigmatism of tear out your records and gut it out, Ranger, and then the medical system of not being able to track stuff and then process volume, not quality, changed, I would say, in my mind, around 2004. 2005, when we first started getting wounded back from the war, the medical system all along wanted to do some of this stuff, but it was never funded. Simply because we were still coming down, as you both know, and tell me to shut up, if I've covered too much history. We went from 1 million active duty force, and by 2000, we were still on the glide path coming down. Our generation joined, and there was lots of us. And so now there were still us diehards that were, still drinking the Kool-Aid that, hey, if the care wasn't that good, at least I'm hanging out with, cool dudes. And so about 2003, enough joint services got involved that they realized they needed to solve this as an enterprise system. And that's why we started getting some care that could be tracked from installation to installation. And then we really got, like you said, Coop, the triage, evac lines streamlined and efficient And then with anything in the Army, we go like this, right? We got a little crazy in 2010 to 13 with everybody was in the MEV process. Everybody, every time as a battalion commander, not every time, but I probably had 60 kids that when they popped hot for drugs or got an Article 15, the next day they walk over to the doctor and they say they got, PTSD or a twisted knee, and now they're spending 18 months in the medical board system. And I was very frustrated as a battalion commander, and I said, you know what? These are, fakers, they got to go. I was dealing with 12% that couldn't deploy and go to the fight. And then I had a very smart colonel who's a hospital commander, said, he explained to me, he said, Glenn, we're barely making mission for the volunteer force, and we're in a fight. We're in a war. I will dozens, if not hundreds, of individual soldiers getting over on the system to ensure to the American public that we're actually caring for those that got wounded and keep the volunteer force going. And for me, that was one of those things. It's kind of like taking bitter medicine. You don't like it, but you understand why you're swallowing. I know that, this guy probably doesn't deserve what he's going to get or the medical board, but the 10 people standing beside him do. And the American people, if they don't believe that we're taking care of all you can never explain to the American people that this person right here never had a medical problem until he got popped for drugs and a hooker. And now all of a sudden, he wants to claim. You'll never win that fight in today's media age. So you just can't worry about him. So to your point, Coop, the medical system took care of me better in the last 15, 20 years than I've ever seen. And to be honest, I have a large group of, the last 4 years, 1/3 of my friends who are colonels retire every year. And I can't find one of them that talks bad about the VA, at least down here, as far as medical care. That's a win as far as I'm concerned from the Army that I started in and the VA that my heroes like First Sergeant Chumley in my book met. It's come such a long way. So is it perfect? No, but I'm like you. I'm vested in the Army. I'm super proud. I wouldn't send my son to it. And they've made some good moves. And what I get mad at some of the vet bros because, they start picking on the generals and I'm like, you must think we're autonomous. We answer to Congress and the president, and we operate within their limits. And if we don't like it, we have a choice. We get out.
Like just to share with you a little laugh here. In one of my vet groups, I'm one of the few officers that's in my vet groups. That's not a whole lot of us. And young kid, this was a few years ago, and I could just tell by his attitude, tatted sleeves and the whole thing, and just his attitude, the way he was acting. That's like this guy probably, I don't know why he's getting VA benefits, but I'm sure he was put out of the Army on some type of waiver. I'm sure of it. And I'm sure he didn't have a successful career. And I was talking to another guy, and he looks over and he goes, "Boy, you were what? You were lieutenant colonel in the Army?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, yeah. Kind of thought you might be a prick." And I looked at him. I said, that sounds exactly like what every shitbag soldier I've ever had would say. And it just got really quiet. And that's kind of my thing. You get a guy with that kind of attitude that didn't understand how, I remember when I was platoon leader, I had to explain to my guys about, okay, you guys are mad at me because of this, but you have no idea how much shit that I put an umbrella up over that you didn't get shit on with. You have no fucking clue. So it's an officer's job to balance policy and soldier needs. That's our job, mission and soldiers. That's why that NCO over there is sticking up for you, and we get into arguments, professional arguments about stuff or debates or whatever, discussions.
Yeah.
You guys don't fucking understand how that works.
One of the best compliments I ever got. I spent 2 summers up at Lewis during Warrior Forge, Glenn. It was advanced camp when we went through.
Mm-hmm.
The first summer I was a squad sticks. He was Strack when we were there, but a squad sticks company commander, and had like 30 NCOs and officers that I was working with that were working various lanes. And the next year I went back as an evaluator. The second year I went back, I ran into one of the NCOs that was one of my NCOs when I was the sticks company commander. And he came up and said, "Sir, I need to apologize to you." I said, "What are you apologizing to me for? We just got here." It's like, "Yeah, but last year I used to bitch a whole bunch about the stuff that you would have us do. And then I get here and I got somebody who doesn't have a filter and, in terms of letting stuff go through." So I realized how you balanced shit and how you, shielded us from stuff that was stupid and pushed through the stuff that we needed to do. And sometimes some stuff got through. He said, I didn't appreciate you last year, but I had to at least tell you that." And I was like, wow, that actually, warms the cockles of my heart when you hear something like that. That's
It warms that lump of coal that you have behind your sternum.
pretty much.
I think it really comes down, as I've started my next chapter, doing some leadership coaching, I've got a chance the last couple of months talking to some great leadership coaches out there. Mike Etor, who's a former Marine colonel and a named executive, who runs leadership, and some others, just to kind of figure out what's the need in the civilian world. Is it everything that I've heard? Because I don't know anything about the civilian world. I'm learning it. And it really comes back to what was the essence, I think, of good leadership in the Army, which was trust-based leadership. Trust. And trust is not something you can demand when you walk in. It's hard to generate it rapidly. I think the military, we do a good job through shared pain, whether it be, leadership reaction course, JRTC, or a combat tour, but it takes a while for your team to understand, like you're talking about. Yeah, if the boss is telling me this, it's already cleared his filters of it's reasonable, it's the right thing to do, it's the best answer for the soldiers, and it's the best answer for the Army and the mission. When they don't think you have that capability is when you lose that trust. And so I think what's key, in fact, I was writing my notes today of how do I talk to, these young civilian CEOs and stuff. And, I think I'm going to say, hey, sometimes you need to tell them when you communicate, hey guys, this is the right thing for the organization. It's the right thing for, character, standards. Here's the impacts to us, but here's what happens if we don't do this. If we don't do this, this unit's in trouble or this fails, so that sometimes they can see the math. And I get some young people, not so much young Army, young. So for me, my last 4 years, young were, lieutenant colonels. But I saw this a lot in some sister services. Well, I don't have time to explain that to them. And I'm like, hey, at your level, you don't have time not to explain it. Because if you can't explain it to the people you're talking to, they can't explain it to the hundreds and thousands. And now you have a cultural issue inside your organization. Probably I did more messaging the same theme every day in any way I could, than anything else. You become a salesman as a leader because you're trying to generate that trust in an organization that constantly changes. And so I share your guys' enthusiasm when I get somebody, and that's why this book, I'll tell you, Russ, has been really enjoyable for me, because I get, the E4 or the E5 or the lieutenant who, sends me a Facebook message, and be like, hey, I got an infantry sergeant who was one of my guardian angels in Afghanistan that wasn't assigned to me, but he was one of my 2 shooters every day, wrote a great thing, on the, web, like, hey, you were one of the only two leaders in my entire career that would sit down and talk to soldiers, about life beyond what the mission was. And those little things mean a lot uh, throughout the years. And so that's one of the things I'm trying to pass on to executives, but also share with people I still talk in the military. Take time to thank people every week, including up, because
Yeah.
your bosses never get anybody because everybody says, oh, it's kissing ass. No, sometimes your boss has a bad day too. You know what I mean?
Yeah. One of the you reminded me one of the best compliments I ever got, and again going back to the ROTC teaching ROTC days, Coop, you remember Chris Roding, great cadet, fabulous young leader. He wrote me an email out of the blue a few years after he got his commission, or I mean about 6 months after he got his commission. I was already in a KD position at my next assignment, and he wrote to me and said, "Hey, sir, I want to let you know that the op order you taught us came in real handy during BOLIC, because everybody's freaking out, and the thing they gave us at BOLIC, a little bit easier than your final. So I kind of was able to take charge, and he said, I really wanted to thank you for teaching me that." And I was like, I wrote back, "Hey, thanks for the note." But inside I'm kind of like, "Oh my God, thanks. That really means a lot when you understand that you've had an impact on somebody and that they might not appreciate it at the time." Because when I was the final I had for the MS3s was they had to write and present an op order, and I picked it apart the way I would when I was a company commander. Making sure they had intent in here and what were the effects they wanted to have and so on and so forth. And obviously they all bitched about it at the time. But then when they come down the road and they understand why you were doing that, that's one of the best feelings in the world. And it actually lets you know you had an impact on people. You had an impact on how they see it. And hopefully they pass that through to the next generation so that kind of continues down the road. So,
There were three that meant the most. Three of the comments I got over the last couple of years that meant the most were actually three soldiers that I put out of the army
oh wow.
under bad circumstance. Saw them pop up. I expected, hey, jerk, loser,
Piece of shit.
yeah, hey, Glenn, now that I can call you that, I'll peep you in a back alley. And actually, one of them sent me their sobriety check.
Wow.
And it was hugely humbling, but it helped me and it fueled me to remind me that everybody should get treated with dignity and respect. And I had a boss once say, and I don't know who it was because I'd love to credit him. He said, generally, 99.9% of every soldier comes to work every day wanting to be a hero, but not all of them will achieve that. But that's what they wanted to. Nobody gets up and says, I want to be a piece of shit today.
I actually used that very sentiment in a job interview.
Yep.
They were asking me how I would handle a difficult situation. And one of the things I used was said, well, nobody wakes, I said, almost nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I want to fuck up today.
Yep.
They come to work wanting to do the right thing, and we got to figure out how to draw that out of them.
Yep. And um, having the tactical patience sometimes to not bite or not engage and as you get a little bit more mature and understand, okay, that person's emotional right now, let them get through their emotion. You catch me, off guard. Um, how many people have told a lie in the moment and an hour later they're yep, you got me. But if you don't give them a chance, or you say, oh, you lied, and you're like, okay, you have to remember people are human, good or bad. And if you would accept that behavior from one of your rock stars having a bad day, you got to give that same credit to someone who may not be your rock star. And that's why I think leadership is hard. And that's another reason why I love the Army practice. What the bad thing about the Army, bad in quotes, is everything's important in the Army. Right? The boss needs slides. God, Ange, I'm not coming home. I'm sleeping in my office because they just changed it from Times New Roman to Arial, and I got to stay up all night to make slides. And you're like, looking back, I'm like, I got post-traumatic stress from PowerPoint. However, those opportunities, we generated our own opportunities to induce chances to lead people. Right or wrong, we got a lot of leadership experience, just like you were talking about, Coop. Hey guys, this just came down. The op order was sat on by the G3 for 4 weeks, and this detailed report that the Department of the Army thought a month was plenty of time to get it done just made it to us, and it's due tomorrow morning. But we're going to work through the night, because if we don't get it right, the Department of the Army can't tell how many PTSD specialists they're going to need next year. So this is important. So we generate those opportunities in leadership. And I will say this, having spent, I don't know how much time you all spent with the other services, I consistently hear from the Air Force and the Navy, to an extent, surface war and, pilots are slightly different, but we're just decades ahead of your counterpart in like the Air Force or Space Force in leadership. Half of my Air Force lieutenant colonels had never been in charge of a single person, not one.
I agree with that. My brother's a retired lieutenant Air Force colonel, and he's a fucking pussy, so I completely agree with that.
Well, they would tell you,
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
They would marvel in our ability to just chat with young, because I would go up and chat to young airmen, and they'd be like, "Hey, how do you do that?"
Veil.
Yeah, I'm like,
Yeah.
it's easy. I look at the airman or the soldier, I find whatever sports team they're wearing, I insult it. Okay. Oh, Celtics, they suck. I don't know what Celtics are. I don't, but by doing that, I said, that takes down the veil of invincibility, gives him something to get back to you, and you've broken bread. And I would think, that's common for the Army, but I see these guys, they grab their notebook and they're like, "Oh, can you slow down? Insult them." No. Okay, you're missing the context. All right. You're doing this to break down this air of officership so that you can actually ask questions and not get canned answers back from them.
And I want to break off on that real quick. I found it's a two-tier thing. It got more important to do as you got higher in rank, but it wasn't something you could learn on the fly, so you had to do it when you were younger. And the reason I say that, and we've all experienced this, it was amazing to me when I pinned on Lieutenant Colonel how everything was suddenly wonderful.
Perfect.
How
people,
we got it, sir. Everything's great. I'm like, so you have to really dig to find out what the real story is. You taught at the War College. I taught at ILE. One of the things I would do with the class when the class is doing their MDMP, people obviously they might be tighter around you because you're the guy in charge, and so I would intentionally have periods where I would leave the class during MDMP. I'd be like, "Oh, I'm going to do battlefield circulation," and I would do that so they would loosen up and be a little bit more, free and open with what they were doing, and then I'd come back and then we chat stuff, and you have to kind of get deeper into what they are so you can have the actual honest communication, because if you don't, soldiers want it's an instinct to want to tell the higher ups that everything is great so that they'll be proud of you. And so a lot of times things are great. A lot of times there's some things that need challenges that either they need advice or they want you to get involved. Now, I did limit my involvement as a lieutenant colonel with either with my battalion that I commanded or with the students at ILE. And what I mean by that is I didn't want them to always think that I had to be the decision maker. I wanted them to know that when I inserted myself, it was important. When I said something or I took charge of something, it was because I saw that as important enough to expend one of what I called my silver bullets. You don't have that many of them because if you get involved all the time and you don't let them have the freedom to create within your intent, then they're gonna become reliant on you, and then you know talked about people thinking they're the smartest in the room. Well, if you're going to do that, you damn well better be the smartest person in the room because that's what you're going to get. That's why it's always funny to me when I listen to civilians that I know talk about, well, you're in the Army, you can just tell them to do something and they got to do it. I'm like, well, that's true, but in a legal sense, but you haven't really been in the Army if you think that you're going to tell some soldier to do something and he's just going to, yes, sir, I'm off I go. That ain't really the way it works.
I actually told somebody, I said, that is so far from the truth. I said, telling a soldier to dig in and having him dig in well are two totally different things. Go make sure the vehicle's ready to go, and actually there's compliant and committed.
Mm-hmm.
Compliance done out of fear, and it's the minimum standard. It looks
Exactly.
a lot like a Russian conscript. And then there's committed, where you're talking about empowering. That's the Ukrainian special territorial brigades that are committed and are doing evolving and empowering. And I think that's a key difference, like you're saying. Two things though I learned when you're talking about getting that ground truth as we get more senior. Um, I loved going to the chow hall and just randomly sitting with soldiers, even if they weren't mine, without anybody else around. I loved going to staff duty on the weekends and just hanging out with them for an hour because they're never happy because they're on duty, so they're generally going to tell you stuff. But there was two things you owe, or I felt I owed everybody in between. And I would tell them this. Because this gets back to that messaging. Guys, this isn't my first day in the Army. So Johnny at CQ, who said the CQ's never had a working phone, that may or may not be true. And I really don't care. I'm letting you know that the phone doesn't work. Not, hey, you failed battalion commander or sergeant major. Colonels don't worry about that. So don't think I'm checking on the subordinate to get a gotcha. Second thing I learned is you might find 10 gotchas. Don't advertise them. Whisper to your sergeant major. But the one awesome thing you find, you better talk about it every day for the next month. Put it on the notes and slides. If you find the one soldier that was, picking up trash because he's proud of his unit area, that dude, you got to talk to him about everywhere, because what are you doing? You're messaging a positive image, but then you get soldiers who realize they can talk to you, and it's not disloyal to their unit because there's pride. Our company's the best or my company's the worst. Either one, I'm not going to talk to you, brigade commander. And then two, you don't want your people who work for you fearing that you're going to measure them based off what you find out. So I always told battalion commanders, you don't need to be with me. You tell me what you wanted to see in the unit. I'm going to look for some stuff that I want to look at. And then you and I will talk. You're going to tell me who you want to recognize because it supports your messaging. And then most importantly, we need to explain to the soldiers why we're doing this so they can get committed. And, back to, circling back, I talk about medical and stuff. I've always believed in PMCS soldiers' perception. If I could get ahead as the brigade commander 6 months out and say, guess what? This summer is going to suck. It's going to suck because we're going to Poland for 90 days and shit in trenches and get eaten up by mosquitoes. But we're going to do it to demonstrate the ability that you don't mess with the U.S. or we will stomp your ass. And when we get back, we're going to do this for families and stuff like that. If you could do that I'm always impressed by how mature our soldiers are. You know, they will bite down on the bit and say, "Yeah, you were lying, sir. That sucked, but we got through it," type stuff. But that takes work. You know, that's where we say these terms like engaged leadership, and I don't think we explain what that is. You know, oh, that just means being at work. No, it actually means not getting your work done that the Army pays you to, because you're going down and motivating others to do theirs or helping them solve problems. The other thing, then I'll shut up. I tell colonels, or I would say, we're midline leaders. We don't have problems. No problems at colonel level. We do two things: solve our subordinates' problems and fix our boss's problems. If we do those two things, magically our problems kind of disappear. So if you would come to me and tell me you got a problem, I'd be like, I don't care. Mildly interesting, Russ. Good luck with that. But if you came and said, hey, my soldiers, hey, I'm all ears. But when I was younger, I really didn't think about my boss. But it wasn't until, I don't know if I told you this story once, Russ. The first time I briefed, so I came out of Afghanistan and I didn't know I was taking a brigade until 3 months before I took it. And so I came out of Afghanistan in April, and I had to go to pre-command course, all of them that they didn't waive, and then get to Germany and take the brigade and deploy it to an exercise all in 45 days after being away from my family for, a year. And I finally get in brigade, get settled, and I brief my initial training plan to my 2-star. One of the best 2-stars I ever worked for, Steve Shapiro. And I'm turning to him like we always do, waiting for him to approve my plan. And, he said the nice words in front of the staff and everything. And, him and I went in my office, we were talking, and he goes, Glenn, I ain't smart enough to tell you what you need to do with your brigade. I'm smart enough to advocate for what you tell me you need to do. And that was the first time I realized at his level, he had this much time, divide that by 1,000,000, to worry about anything below him. He was trying to solve his boss's problem and the president's problem. And so he needed me to solve his problem, not my problem. And so he was banking on that what I told him I needed to do in my brigade was going to solve his problem. And to do that, I needed to understand the other brigades around me, those people who weren't sexy, like medical folks or like garrison commanders, or all this stuff that when I was younger was just pain in the ass. Well, now it was all part of the fabric of the complex environment. And I think that's where, to your point, that leadership and that getting out and empowering people, you got to let your people run. And you give them the limits, and then they may not do it the way Coop would have done it, but if it met your intent, Coop, you're like, hey, great job. I don't like, in your head, you're saying, I hate pink, you painted it pink. But I said I needed to paint it. I was solving my boss's problem. And so guess what? Pink's now my favorite color.
You just to provide a little comic relief, this last couple 20 minutes or so has reminded me of the old adage, the famous Army adage, in a ham and eggs breakfast, the chicken might be involved, but the pig is committed.
That is very true.
I hope we still have time because there's still a couple things I want to get to. Coop, we still good?
Yeah, we're still good. I got about let's see, what time is it? I've got
8:42.
I got about 15 minutes.
Okay.
So if we could wrap it up in about 15, that would be cool. I got Lucy fur down in the crate, and I don't like to leave her in there for more than 2 hours at a time. So
yeah, he's got a new dog that's going to be a beast that pisses and shits all over his house right now.
She doesn't shit anymore, and she doesn't piss that much. So we're getting there. She's only 5 months old, Glenn, and she almost weighs 70 pounds already. She's she's half Pyrenees and half Shepherd. And she at the vet 2 weeks ago, she was 65 pounds, or 1 week ago. Yeah, that's a 5 month old.
She's probably going to get 95 pounds, you think?
I
Oh,
think
more.
120. I think 120.
Yeah,
I
she'll
think
get
she's going to
that.
be
She'll go up to
purity.
115, 120.
Yeah, I think here. Yeah, if you saw her paws are. Russ can tell you, I have a huge head, and I just do. It's a size 8 hat. So I'm 6'3", 250, so I'm a big dude.
Hey,
So
geez.
I got the shoulders and the upper body to support it. My lower body, as a buddy of mine says every time I wear shorts, you look like a moose riding a chicken. I have no I have no lower
We
body.
didn't do legs back in the day in the army. We
No,
ran.
because
I
that
did
added to
legs.
weight and weight. Yeah,
I could
couldn't
squat like a
take those.
motherfucker, but I could never. My legs never looked worse shit. But anyway, I have a size 8 hat size. That's a large head.
Wow.
That's a very large.
Yeah.
That's that German Viking, Scottish, Russian thing going on here. But the Lucy's paw fits comfortably all the way over my forehead now and over the top of it. She did that to me this morning. She pawed me, got up on the bed and pawed me, and I'm like, "Fuck, your paw's bigger than my 7 head or whatever you used to call it, Russ,
Yeah.
back in the day." Yeah, so
Wow.
she's gonna be a nightmare, but she's gonna be a great dog. She's gonna be a great dog. She's a sweetheart and she's coming along well. And then I have a 14-year-old coonhound that I've had for 12 years, and he's downstairs too. And so it's interesting how they interact. But anyway,
Wow.
didn't mean to change the subject, but we got about 15 minutes, so let's
Yeah.
let's
So
roll.
a couple things real quick because we don't have time to get too much into a much deeper topic right now. I would not mind, and this Glenn depends on your amenability, is maybe a couple months from now, maybe coming back together and expanding on some of these topics.
Love to.
Because
Yeah, I'd
I've
love to
got
have you back. And maybe even I'd like to do these at least once a month, Russ, from now on and try to get folks on here. And so Glenn, you're welcome back anytime. This was
yeah.
I was fascinated by some of your stories and I love your perspective. So
Yeah, let's give Glenn a month or two to decompress.
you bet. No,
From
yeah,
this
it's
one.
up to
Plus,
you.
I'm
It's
sure
up to
Glenn, it
you.
feels kind of weird, thinking retired, not having to. It took me a while to understand that if I'm hurting, I don't have to get up and do PT. Now I still work out 7 days a week when I'm okay, but if I'm sick, I don't have to show up to the gym or something. So that mindset takes a little bit of changing. There's some things that you'll encounter that, for example, Glenn, your boss has a meeting scheduled. When do you show up?
15 minutes before, of course.
Yeah, I showed up 10 minutes early to my first staff meeting, and I sat in that room alone for 9 minutes and 45 seconds. And then some of our acronyms, I looked at my boss and said, hey, because he made us call him Ben. I said, Ben, just for your essay. He's like, you're going to have me write an essay? What are you talking about? And I was like, oh, sorry, for your situational awareness. I'm talking about we're bracketing target. So it takes a little bit to pull from that mindset. So I would like to revisit some of the other topics that I had, maybe 6 to 8 weeks down the road. But one thing I did want to, for the light side, because we mentioned that the Army gets a lot of stuff right, and it does. But as any large organization, we have also seen our fair share of stupid. And what I would like as a humorous maybe ending to this, humorous anecdotes, is if you can think of maybe what comes to your mind as the stupidest, most, eye-rolling thing. It doesn't have to be the most. I mean, one that comes to mind that you experienced through your Army career. Glenn, I'll give you a couple of seconds to think on that. Coop, do you have anything off the top of your head? Because God knows I do.
Oh, well, yeah, but most of them have to do with me.
Well, yeah,
How
I get it.
how fucked up I was. I'll give you 2 quick ones. I think you might have been there being our op for at the time, but NTC, I think it was probably 96, maybe.
Yeah, I was there. I got there I was there for the May rotation of 96 because I graduated Ranger School April 15th.
Yeah, I'll throw myself under the bus. Just 2 quick stories. So, my command Humvee just died, and it was famous for being the dog of the battalion, and we were always working on it. PMCS was rough, and I can't remember. You remember that long winding road that goes down to the cantonment area as you come into NTC? It's a pretty steep road. Well, I was
10-mile
cheating.
stretch there, yeah.
Yeah, I was cheating. I was up there and I was glassing you up from up there. I was actually off the actual base, so totally cheating. And that's where my Humvee died. And so we have of course, so we have LD in like 5 fucking minutes. And I'm like, motherfucker. So I called one of my dudes on the old little on the old little FM radio there, and I'm like, come up here. I need you to come to this grid coordinate. So I see the Humvee roll up, and we have blackout lights, of course. So I'm like, get behind me and push us. Just bump us with your brush guard and push us down the hill, and we'll start coasting, and then we'll make LD. I can jump in with somebody else or jump on one of the tracks, whatever. So we're going along. We're going pretty fast. My driver was like, fuck, let's go. We got to get there. We're probably cruising down that hill about 45 miles an hour in blackout lights, and an MP goes the other direction. So, of course, he swings around and he comes running up to the Humvee thinking he's going to find, and he sees that I got the rank on back then on the lapel. And he looks at me, and I will always love this. He was an E5. And I think I was a first lieutenant probably at the time. And he looks at me and he goes, sir, this is so fucked up. I don't even know what to say. And he just stomps off and goes back to his vehicle. I will love that guy forever. He didn't do shit. He actually sounded like his feelings were hurt because we were breaking every safety regulation, every Army regulation, Fort Irwin regulation. Well, blackout lights going 45 miles an hour, having another Humvee push me and bump me down the hill to keep me going. Mission, baby. Mission, baby. The other one is, have I ever told you the famous fire ant story?
No.
Okay. So we were at Bradley Table Gunnery. I think we were at like Bradley Table 7 or 8 at Fort Hood, and hadn't slept very much for 2 or 3 days. Busy. Gunnery's busy. And so we're having a battalion trim out in the field, with a makeshift sawhorses and a piece of plywood. Mm-hmm. And they have the whiteboard and actually it was the flip paper back in those days, I'm sure, and all that. And I'm sitting on what I thought was a log, and I'm a measly platoon leader at the time. And I'm sitting on a piece of wood that was a fire ant's nest, and I fall asleep. Sitting up, and I fall asleep. And then at this was a brilliant coordinated attack by this fire ant colony. Commando style in the field, not wearing any underwear, of course. They had managed to crawl up. My boots and my BDUs were bloused perfectly, so the chiggers and ants couldn't get in, but they found their way into the buttons by the groin there, the fly. And I got bit about 30, 40 times simultaneously by fire ants who had crawled and infiltrated my groin area. Their objective was coop groin. And I get up and I scream. Right in the middle of, and the battalion commander we had at the time, this is 27 Cav. This guy was a hard ass. He was scary. I mean, he was fucking scary. I remember the first time I met him and walked into his office, he was still wearing camouflage from the field and chain smoking cigarettes. He says, "Get your fucking ass in here, Lieutenant." When I reported for duty for my very first day, he was a scary guy, good guy, but scary. And I scream, everybody stops. I start running to the brush, but in the meantime, I'm like trying to tear these. I don't know what's going on. I actually pull my pants apart. My belt was loose, and I trip because my pants fall down to my knees. I trip and I bite it right in the dirt, almost in front of the fucking table and the flip chart, with my ass naked up in the air. My face goes buried, my ass up in the air, and then I get up and I run around this bush and I'm tearing at these fire ants, and I'm like, I make the biggest mistake I've ever made. My roommate was the S4, battalion S4. His name was Christian. I go, "Christian, get back here and help me." Yeah. So at the next Gary Owen stable call, we had one a month where we'd wear our Stetsons and smoke stogies and, drink beer out of yards and stuff like that. They actually named an award after me called the Ant Fucker. And it was a plastic dildo with a plastic ant on it. And it was up in the showcase that you walked into the battalion area, and you're talking, this is 27 Cav with a lot of heroes. You're talking, we were soldiers once and young, guys from that fight and stuff like that. A lot of heroes from back in the day. Here's this dildo with an ant on it. And I guess the division commander came in there one day and saw that and got it removed after I'd left. But yeah, there was an award named after me called the Ant Fucker for the biggest fuck up in the field by anybody, any officer. That was me.
Okay, well, I'm gonna have a little bit of trouble topping that. I got two as well. I'll tell the one on me, and then I'll tell the one that annoyed me. All right, the one on me, I was a second lieutenant. That's a lot of stories that start that way. And I'm at Fort Irwin, and they're gonna have. Do you remember the BOSS program, Better Opportunities for Single Soldiers? All right, they're gonna have a BOSS event at the club. It's called. It was Wild West Night, and me and my soldiers volunteered to go deal poker and blackjack. Help raise funds and stuff. And so I find out, I don't know, 5 hours before this event, that even though we're volunteers at the event, we have to pay to get in. And so I go to my buddy who's the AS2 and had coordinated all this. I'm like, dude, what's going on? Why are we having to pay to get in? And he says, hey, Russ, this was not on me. Here is the number of the woman in charge. And so Russ being Russ, I'm going to confront this problem head on. And I get on the phone. I have no idea who this woman is. I get on the phone. I'm like, ma'am, my name is Lieutenant Meyer, and I'm just finding out about we're having to, pay to get in, and we're volunteers. And she immediately got snippy with me. She's like, all my volunteers are paying to get in. Why are you guys special? I'm like, man, I just found out about this. What the hell are y'all talking about making soldiers pay to get into the volunteers? Well, your soldiers aren't special. Tell you what, though, if it's that big a deal, I'll come down and give you some tickets. Where are you? What's your name? I said, my name is Lieutenant Russ Meyer. I'm at building 257 Charlie. Why don't you come on down? I'll be waiting out front for you. About 10 minutes later, my company commander walks into the training room and says, Russ, did you just call the wife of the garrison commander and like yell at her over the phone? I'm like, I don't know who the garrison commander's wife is. Or Miss Thomas, the one running the boss event tonight. Oh yeah, I did talk to her. She got real snippy with me on the phone. And he's like, Russ, shut up, okay? All right, the squadron commander wanted to bring you into his office and discuss your lack of manners with Mrs. Thomas and the wife, the wife of the garrison commander. I was able to peel that off for now, but he's going to want to talk to you. We need to talk about your diplomatic skills, and knowing where to employ those. So that was, I've been in the unit, I don't know, 3 months. That was my introduction to Fort Irwin, was my ability to very politely engage with the wife of the garrison commander, who went to her husband, who then went to the regimental commander, and then the squadron commander, and then my troop commander. So that was one fun thing for me. Coop, you know what a diplomat
and
I am.
they made you the protocol officer over in 2ID.
Yeah, I know.
So,
the second thing was an Army bureaucracy thing that I had to deal with. In Iraq in 2011, I told you I spent 7.5 years in Hawaii. So in Iraq in 2011, we were changing out the old LBV, the vest for the new kit, the one that you put over. I don't know what it's called anymore. The IB something. Anyway, IB not remembering what it was. So this was outside of the division operations center. Go up, turn in my vest. They give me a turn-in document. I get the new kit. Everything's cool. So about 4 years later, I am clearing Hawaii. I'm getting ready to go to Saudi Arabia. Got to turn in all my stuff. And so I've got everything. And they said, sir, you still have an LBV on your record. I said, yep. I know that. Here's the turn-in document where I turned it in Iraq. The guy says, well, that's nice, but we're not going to accept that. You need to do a flipple. And I'm like, I need to do what? I've got a turn-in document signed by the Army.
Here's your fucking flipple.
Yeah, they said, nope. Regulations say we have to have a flipple. I brought that back to my brigade commander, because I was battalion commander at the time. I brought that back to Scott Mitchell. I don't know if either of y'all have ever worked with Scott. Great guy. And I'll never forget, Scott laughed for 90 seconds, 2 minutes straight at what we had to do. Most comical. I was in Russ Meyer mode, so I was not amused at the time. But Scott laughed a lot at the predicament of the Army, basically giving me a valid turn-in document for something and then requiring a full flipple after that. It didn't take long. Obviously, they found me not liable and everything, but it was the perfect epitome of Army bureaucracy in that moment, especially with CIF, which we've all had to deal with at some point. So that was what I wanted to share. That was one of the things I will never forget. And that if I ever do write that book, there's got to be a harder way. That story is probably going in there somewhere. So anyway, that's mine.
Hard to top you, gentlemen. I'll try to give you three short vignettes of just feeling of like, no shit, there I was. Is this really happening? I think the first one, I found myself in Yemen in 2005. We flew across in a little Cessna with a bag full of cash, um, land at an airport, and then by that nightfall, we're in a four-star hotel in a Muslim country, surrounded by machine guns, drinking vodka, listening to a girls group from Latvia sing country and western. And I'm like, where did I just step off into? This is, how did I get here? Because I was in Third Army Kuwait. I'm like, what am I doing? Alice, did I take the blue pill? Should have been the red pill. But that was the first one. The second one was, do you guys remember the Rhino? It was the long thing that we connected to our Humvees for about a year and a half in Iraq.
Yeah, I think so.
So in 2006, I was a Battalion 3 in Iraq, and we had to do this huge deal to install these big boom arms to the front of our Humvees. And at the end of the boom arm was this thing that looked like an ammo can. And what it was a heat generation. And this was to defeat the IEDs that had the IR trigger.
Mm-hmm.
They were triggering on the engine. So we put this huge boom. We spent 2 months in my battalion alone, rotating him out to a contractor so that we would put this heat signature in front of the Humvees. Exactly about a day later, the insurgents went, boop. All they did was change the angle of the detonation by 3 degrees. So about $400 million was defeated by. So that was my second, we should have thought that shit through. And then the final, I'll end with the old saying that lieutenants are lieutenants. When I was in Afghanistan, I would sometimes, so I was one of 4 people in Afghanistan at the time that I had a waiver signed by General Nicholson that I could travel with 0 US. I could go with just Afghans. I didn't do it very often. Would have been great when I was a lieutenant, scared the shit out of me as a colonel. But most days I would at least drive to the embassy with a couple of shooters. Or not the embassy, the ministry. And one day I happened to notice one of my sergeants looking over his weapon. A new unit had rotated in. They had a platoon, was not a very squared away battalion, which was shocking because it was out of 101st. And the sergeant's looking over his ACOG. And I was like, hey, Sergeant, you know that sucker works better if you look to it. He's also, sir, my ACOG's all screwed up. So what do you mean all screwed up? I mean, they just got here. They've only been here a week. Oh, and so he shows me, and it's completely fogged up inside. You can't see it. And I'm like, you need to tell your unit. He's, sir, it's been deadlined, and I reported to my platoon leader for 6 weeks. I'm like, okay. So I get back, and I asked the platoon leader, who's a brand new second lieutenant infantryman, to come see me. And this guy had no fear. My whole team were 8 colonels because it's all the strategic advisors now. And he comes in, and I'm like, Lieutenant, how the hell are you putting a sergeant in risk out there, putting me in risk than a function weapon? You need to get his ACOG fixed. And he looks at me and says, sir, I'm dealing with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I still don't have grease or oil for my crew serve weapons. I went Russ. I clicked off save. I said, you are in theater. You're the only ground combat unit in this vicinity, and you haven't even lubed your crew serves. I said, I'm going to solve that for you. Sir, I don't need your help. I said, you're confused. I pick up his battalion commander's phone number. I'm like, hey, do you need help finding lube? And of course, you can imagine where that goes. But I saw myself Glenn Schmick, the lieutenant, probably would have said something like, I'm struggling with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, thinking that a colonel would take that valid. And then this is God paying me back 20 years later. I'm looking at this lieutenant like he has got something growing out of his forehead. He has no idea that he is jeopardizing and risking soldiers' lives. He got up that day trying to do the right thing, but the Army system was failed. Cool thing was he came back that night and magically they had found the one can of, crew serve oil in all of Afghanistan. But yeah, that's my story. But my favorite one for Army bureaucracy, and I'll save the one for the Pentagon later, but the one that shook my head was the Rhino. The best and brightest minds of America military complex spent hundreds of millions of dollars to solve a problem that the enemy defeated in about 4 seconds. But
All those
they woke up that day and
genius
thought it'd be
scientists at
different.
DARPA, all those genius scientists at DARPA getting together on that one.
Yep. But hey, gentlemen, I know we gotta go. I want to be remiss. Thank you for asking me to do this. It is fun. You are both awesome, and Russ, I've been a fan of yours since I visited you up there, and you were an author, and I was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah,
friggin',
I
I need to
appreciate
catch
that.
up.
That's humbling. That's humbling.
Um,
Thank you.
and so I think it's important to keep what you guys do alive. Less and less people know about the military and the experiences, and sometimes what we talk about doesn't translate to the American people because we are kind of a foreign shogun class. And I'm a firm believer there's a lot of our vet bro brothers out there, just or at least the ones I see, aren't doing us justice. They're either, oh, the military all sucks, or you could never understand because you didn't go through, it's kind of the two spectrums. And I think we owe it to kind of show the funny, show the pride, and continue to keep the tradition. I went to my first VFW. I went to join my local VFW and I realized I don't think there was a single officer in there. And I was like, there's a problem. So thanks again for having me, guys. I loved it.
Yeah, and Glenn, definitely want to see if we can pick the conversation back up in a couple months. There's a bunch more I'd like to cover, both from the serious to the silly, because I got several stories I just got reminded of as you're talking, and then there were several things we didn't get to that I'd like to talk about. Army promotion process, driving 24/7 versus balanced reset, optimizing. Optimistic versus resilient soldiers.
Yeah.
There's a
I'd really like to.
on,
I would really like to get Glenn's perspective. We talked a little bit about it, Glenn, but your perspective. I won't get political in this one, but when we talk about the wokeness that's taken over the military and the transitions that maybe you've seen and how that's affected readiness and your perspective on that. Next podcast we get together, I would love to get into that. It's one of my favorite topics. Russ and I, as you know, Russ and I are the wokeless #wokeless, and so we come at that pretty hard. So I would like to get your perspective on a leader that's, Jesus, gone through how many transitions. I got out before that whole movement took place, and so I hear it from my kids now. But love to get your perspective on that next time
I
too.
do. I've got a lot on that, and from having my first, as a brigade commander, trying to navigate transgender, to all these other things. I've got lots of stuff we can talk about.
Yeah, it'd be
Absolutely.
great.
so
Could
let's
you
see about coming back, in a couple months. Maybe let's tentatively look at sometime in August. Glenn, I don't know what you're like. I know you got a boy that's going back to school. I got a daughter that's going off to college for the first time in August.
Congrats.
But I would like to continue the conversation. I think that this could be a good in-depth one. And maybe we can see about doing that down the road. So appreciate the time for everybody. And I think this was a good conversation.
Great conversation.
Thanks, guys.
Could you talk about your book? Just pimp your book just one more time, please. The title and where people can find that.
Yeah, it's called Serving with Honor, A Soldier's Lessons in Leadership. And it's on Amazon. All you got to do is look at my last name, Schmick. And I wrote it so that if you're interested in the military and want to hear some crazy stories, it's there. If you're trying to figure out what may be a way, I'll say a way to have an honorable career, or if you're trying to glean lessons that may apply to the civilian world and leading organizations. I tried to thread that needle, and I'll leave it to the readers and Russ to decide whether I did it. But I am very proud of it. I don't really care if it ever makes a dime. It's already done what I wanted to do. I've had a couple people who are still in the military who said, "Hey, I got something out of it," and to me, that's gold.
Awesome.
Outstanding.
Thanks, guys.
It was lovely to meet you, sir. Lovely to meet you.
You too. I love meeting another grumpy old. In fact, I didn't know how formal this was. My wife got me the new grunt style grumpy old vet, so I almost wore that. I think I'll wear it next time.
Wear it next time, Glenn. I almost had Coop and I show up in suits and ties just to fuck with you, but decided not to.
We talked about it.
I would have had a moment of stress, and then I would have said, "Oh yeah, I'm retired." I'm wearing my app state.
My 30-year-old Nirvana T-shirt that shows you how great we are. Yeah.
Man, you can still fit in it. I'm jealous.
Well, it stretches. It stretches after time. All right,
you guys
man.
have a good night.
God bless you.
Thanks,
God
Glenn.
bless you. God bless you, sir.
Guys.
You have a great one.
All right, Coop. I'll talk to you later.